Da mai tare. Auzi și eu. Că bine acum.
Bună ziua tuturor și bine ați revenit la un eveniment marca EventsMax, oameni și companii. Am să vorbesc astăzi în limba engleză pentru că invitatul de astăzi este vorbitor de limba engleză. So, hello everyone, I'm glad to see you at the new meeting of the community of marketing and communication professionals and also enthusiasts. And it is, as you know, organized by EventsMax.ro by Marketing Manager. I am Cătălin Hosu. I am a senior consultant in communication and public relations for more than 20 years, and in the field of public relations and communication for more than 25 years. I am also the president of the Romanian Association of Public Relations. Today, we're going to explore some ways to promote our brand and our products, or use an increasingly common tool in contemporary marketing, which is the podcast and the business podcast, if you want to go on a niche. Joining us is Eric Melchor. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Cătălin.
Thank you for being with us. Before we begin, I will share with you some organizational details. The meeting is recorded, and as you know, we're also live on Facebook pages of EventsMax and Marketing Manager, where you can follow us. You can ask your questions and comments live, and you can open your microphone and intervene, or through the Q&A and chat sections, where and I will choose from there, and I will read it from there to our guest today. We aim to have a session which will be as interactive as possible. So we look forward to your questions in the chat. About EventsMax.ro is a platform for business and professional events in Romania. It was launched 2 years ago, and it promotes and analyzes information on more than 1,000 events every month. So more than 1,000 events every month. If you want to receive the list of the upcoming events in your areas or of interest, you can subscribe for free to one of their more than 60 newsletters. There is a newsletter which includes events in marketing, but also for other business and professional fields. My colleagues are sending now in the chat section the link to EventsMax registration page. The partners of our session today are a well-known hotel group from Bucovina who are waiting for you to test corporate and other professional events. La Conac in Bucovina, Voroneț Blue, Hanul Cotubuhi. So now I will get to the topic of today, podcasts, or more specifically, business podcasts. Our guest today, Eric Melchor. Eric Melchor, is a former marketing director for publicly traded companies in Houston, Texas, United States, like Sunova and Spark Energy. Since moving to Romania almost 4 years ago, he's consulted for tech startups like Bonjoro, Cartloop, and Ronin Sport. Having interviewed over 100 European startup founders on his podcast, B2B Marketers Can Laugh, Eric launched a B2B podcast media network, B2B PodPros, to help brands generate high-quality leads through sponsorships. The network includes more than 25 reputable B2B creators across Europe and North America, and is trusted by SAS brands like Dealfront, sessions.us, and Plannable. Together with Eric, we will learn today about the benefits of business podcast marketing, how to choose the right podcast, what KPIs we need to pay attention to, and how we can integrate this form of marketing into our overall strategy. Eric, it is quite impressive. So how should we start today?
Oh, well, I just say let's begin. I'm going to share some slides here. And in this presentation, we're going to go over exactly the things that you mentioned. I think there's going to be some time left over for Q&A that I'll be happy to participate in. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
All right. Can you see my screen, Cătălin? Okay. In the 1970s, the average person saw between 500 to 1,600 ads per day. Question for the audience. Question, today, how many ads do you think the average person sees every day? Feel free to write it in the chat. I think Cătălin is going to buy whoever's the closest dinner. Is that what we discussed, Cătălin?
For sure.
Yeah. Take a guess. Write what you think that is in the chat. I'm curious to see some of the responses here. Of course, 50 years later, there's new media channels. Social media wasn't around back then. Online websites weren't around back then. Do we have any responses in the chat?
Well, I will give one. I hope I will be close to it. That way I
Okay.
wouldn't have to buy any dinner.
What do you think, Cătălin?
My number is 250.
Oh, no, a lot more than that. So today, the average person sees between 6,000 to 10,000 ads a day,
Wow.
or is at least exposed to. That's right, they're exposed to. And so you got to think about it. Network TV, hundreds of ads per day. If you watch Romanian television, when I first started watching Romanian television, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of advertisements here, because the typical commercial break is like 7 or 8 minutes, maybe even longer than that. A lot of ads. You've got streaming TV now. You've got social media. If you're scrolling at Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, lots and lots of ads while you're scrolling that you're exposed to. Of course, your traditional magazine, newspaper, ads in those places. And then, of course, you go walk outside and you've got billboards and outdoor and posters and things on buses. Lots and lots of ads. Another question here for the audience. Your typical podcast, your average podcast, how many ads are in a podcast episode? You don't have to write it in. Feel free to do so. Cătălin, right back at you. How many ads do you think are in your typical podcast episode?
I would say about 25.
No, 1 to 2. 1 to 2 ads per 30-minute podcast episode, right?
Wow.
And if you want to go even niche, like B2B related podcasts, a lot of them don't even have commercials or ads in those conversations or in those episodes. I published more than 100 episodes from my podcast, and within the first 100, there was no ads whatsoever. So you're talking about a conversation that I had with a startup founder. It could have been from Romania, Bulgaria, maybe the Netherlands, and within that entire segment, no ads whatsoever. So we're going to talk a lot about podcasting. Who am I first? As Cătălin mentioned, I worked for different startups, but one of the things that I did for Bonjoro and OptiMonk is that I was able to help generate an additional $300,000 in annual recurring revenue, and it was through guest podcasting. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. I've interviewed more than 100 European startup founders on my podcast, B2B Marketers Can Laugh, which was formerly known as Innovators Can Laugh. And I founded B2B PodPros. We're a community that's growing. We have more than 25 niche B2B podcasters in there. And I've implemented podcast sponsorship campaigns for companies like Plannable and Sessions, and then as well as Leadfeeder, which is also known as DealFriend. So in this presentation, I'm going to share first a few fun facts, and then the kinds of podcast marketing opportunities that you can participate in that are available. I'll discuss where can you buy ads and how to measure and track engagement. And then finally, some advertising tips that we are learning as we do these advertising campaigns that I think you'll appreciate. So quick survey here that was asked, a group of consumers. I am more willing to consider products and services after learning about them on this media, right? And the highest one up there was podcasts. It just kind of goes to show that podcast listeners, when it comes to that medium channel, they are not exposed to as many ads as on other channels. And so it makes sense. I mean, wherever there's less saturation, there's more attention. And that's why I'm excited about podcasting. And I think that's why you should be excited about podcasting. More than 90 million Americans are weekly podcast listeners. 49% of listeners believe that podcast hosts use the products and services they recommend. And that is very, very true. I've bought products. I bought crickets, dried crickets that were dead, for crying out loud, because Tim Ferriss recommended them. And I've bought other products that podcast hosts recommend them because I like the podcast hosts. I trust them. I believe they use them. And therefore, I was more inclined to check them out or even purchase those products. Okay. Another stat, 71% of respondents say ads increase their awareness of products, brands, and services, just based on that chart that we just saw. Okay, so you may be thinking, well, it's just Americans who listen to podcasts, right? No, not necessarily. A higher podcast listener consumption can be found in other countries like Mexico, Sweden, and Brazil. That's right. There's other countries where there's more listeners. I think Italy's ranks high up there too. I was reading about recently, and Romania's coming up too. In fact, there's actually 3 Romanian podcasters in my network. Alexandra Nicorici, she hosts the Web3 marketing podcast. She's very well known in the blockchain and Web3 community. We've got Kristen Dina, who works at TechPond. It's a SaaS marketplace based here in Bucharest. I think he's published over 100 different episodes. And Oana Leonte, she's got a great show called Unmatched, and very popular. I think she has more than 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. And so she pushes her content and promoting her podcast on LinkedIn. And she's got a lot of listeners and downloads too. And she's fairly new. I think she's got less than 20 podcast episodes published. But because she's got a good and loyal audience, she's been able to really get a lot of downloads fast. So there are some Romanian listeners as well as podcast hosts. What kinds of podcast marketing opportunities are there? Okay, there's 3. I'm going to go over them very quickly and then come back to podcast advertising. The first one is guest podcasting. This is really easy. This is you basically going on a podcast and talking about who you are, what problems you're trying to solve, talking about maybe some use cases, your product or service. And I think it's fantastic. I think for 30 or 60 minutes of your time, you get a really good return on investment, because as a podcast host, I'm not just distributing my podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, right? I'm also pushing my podcast on YouTube. I'm promoting it through a newsletter. I'm pushing it on social media, talking about it on LinkedIn. So there's just a lot of exposure in many different avenues just from one 30-minute podcast interview that the guest had with me, right? 30 minutes. And I'm actually pushing out his message to a target audience that he's trying to connect with, right? The other great things about it is that it does help you focus on your messaging, and it sharpens your speaking skills. And so if you're not really used to maybe getting on stage, podcasting is a great way to improve that. Or again, it's a one-on-one conversation. Super easy. How do you do this? Well, there's agencies that can basically help you out. I think some of the rates are anywhere from $200 to $500 per booking. There's actually some services like Podmatch that are more of an automated approach, where they send messages on your behalf and they try to get you booked on different podcasts. I know some of the podcasters in my community actually accept guests that come through Podmatch. And so that's why I included this in here, because I do think it's a good service. And then you can do it yourself. I did it myself. I spent a few hours a week, and I went on more than 40 different podcasts on behalf of OptiMonk. And within about 7 or 8 months, we started noticing a huge uplift in traffic that were coming to the OptiMonk website, attributed to my guest podcasting, going on podcasts, e-commerce related podcasts, and talking about OptiMonk and the features and the benefits and things like that. there's a process. I mean, I had a playbook. I wrote down, what worked, what didn't work, what scripts in terms of like subject lines and messages and my pitches. And I got better over time, and I created this playbook. And if anybody would like to see that playbook, just feel free to send me a message afterwards and I'll send it to you for free. But that's guest podcasting. That's one way that you can grow your brand through podcasting, and that's by being a guest. The second way is launching a podcast of your own. In general, it takes about 2 to 3 years to build an audience. Okay. Now, if you already have a huge audience, then obviously it's going to be much faster than that. If you've got a lot of followers or maybe a huge newsletter list or something like that, people are following you on one channel, then you'll be able to convert a few of them over to your podcast. So, but in general, most podcasters will tell you it takes 2 to 3 years. It takes anywhere from 7 to 18 hours to produce one episode. And depending on who you ask, 7 hours is usually the most minimum. And that includes everything from booking the guest to doing the recording, to doing the video editing, to doing the distribution and marketing. It could take a long time. It costs anywhere from maybe $200 to $1,500 a month, maybe even more. But I've never met a podcaster that's spending less than $200. And that includes tools like distribution tools like Buzzsprout that actually pushes your podcast to all the various players out there, and maybe an editing software tool like Descript, and then maybe even an email calendar booking software tool. But usually editors, the minimum that you're going to find is maybe $200 a month, and that's usually 4 episodes, right? So there's a cost to this. It's a long game, but I think it's a great way to build relationships. It's a door opener. There's no better way to get to know somebody than from getting to know them over 30-minute conversation, asking questions about them. And so it is a great way to build relationships. But again, it's a long game, and it takes 2 to 3 years to build that audience. Now, the third way is through advertising. This is like buying ad spots on podcasts. This is what I specialize in for clients. I like it because it's a very quick and easy way to hit your brand alongside somebody who's reputable, who has credibility, somebody who already has an audience that you're going after. And for those niche podcasts, like I said, a lot of them are not even running ads, or if they do, maybe they just run one ad per episode. There's 2 main types of ads. There's pre-recorded and host-read, kind of self-explanatory. Pre-recorded, maybe you, the brand, record an ad, and then you send it to all the podcasts, and they run that pre-recorded ad for you. And then there's host-read ads, and that's where you actually ask the host to read the ad himself or herself. And that's the much better choice because it sounds more authentic, it sounds more genuine, more believable, it flows with the show. So if you do any sort of campaigns, I always recommend doing a host-read ad. And then there's baked-in ads or dynamic ads. I'm going to talk about this more in the next slide. And there's generally 3 places where you can insert it. At the beginning of a podcast episode, in the middle, which is called a mid-roll, or at the end, post-roll. Whatever you do, try to stay away from post-roll ads because those are the ones that people don't really stick around for, and a lot of people skip over, and that actually has the lowest conversion rate. So the one that has the highest conversion rate are your mid-roll ads because they're already baked into the conversation. They're part of it, and it makes them less likely to be skipped over. In terms of dynamic ad insertion versus baked-in ads, they're static. We call them evergreen because once they're part of the recorded episode, they stay there forever. Somebody 4 months later on comes over and they listen to that episode, they hear your ad. A year later, they see that episode on YouTube and your ad's playing. It's fantastic. The only reason this could be a bad experience is maybe the business goes out of business, or maybe you have a promo code that was mentioned in the ad and it's no longer working, right? That could be a bad experience. Dynamic ads, if you're purchasing ads on the larger networks, this is what they do. They dynamically insert an ad using AI into the show, and it can play across the entire episode backlog. So this is actually good, maybe if you're advertising on a show that has maybe 500 episodes or more, and so that ad is not just going to run on the new show, but also the pre-existing shows. The caveat is that once the campaign finishes, your ad's going to be removed, and it's going to be replaced with another advertiser, another brand, right? So just keep that in mind if you do a campaign with dynamic ads. Okay, how many listeners do podcasts have on average, right? Well, it really depends on the industry. If it's a news podcast or sports or maybe a true crime related podcast, then those listeners are going to be in the thousands, right? But the more niche the podcast is, the less number of downloads it has. I mean, if there's a podcast that's just targeting, or it's just in Romanian, for example, and it's specifically for lawyers, there's not going to be 1,000 downloads for that, right? More than likely, the people who are listening to that are Romanian attorneys, right? And maybe the download numbers are small. Maybe it's less than 50 a month, right? So the more niche you get, the less number of downloads. The better question to ask is, would you be happy speaking in an auditorium in front of your ideal customer profile, in front of your ideal target audience? Let's say there was only 15 people in the audience and you had their attention for 30 minutes, right? Would you be happy? I think most brands would be, right? And so that's the better question to ask. I mean, in the beginning, clients would ask us, okay, how many downloads did this podcast have? Well, we're pretty niche. You know, some of our podcasts only have maybe 100 downloads a month, but what matters is the audience, because if it's the audience that you're going after, then that's where it really, really makes sense. I mean, if we only have 100 listeners, maybe 10 of them try your product and maybe 3 or 4 convert, that's still a big win. Versus if you go do an in-person event and you buy a booth and you spend thousands of dollars on this and you come away and you didn't even get any customers, well, I think the better decision there would it be, you know, being on a podcast that's already targeting your customer, your target audience, and your listeners are already there, your audience already there. Right? Now, the next question is why consider a podcast ad campaign? Well, the main reason that most advertisers are choosing podcasts right now is to raise awareness. Maybe there's a new product launch or part of a go-to-market strategy. Maybe they want to just talk about a case study or market update. Most of our clients, when they approach us, it's because they're looking for new growth channels. And so they're experimenting with this. They're testing podcasts as a growth channel. One of the first brands to do this was HubSpot, obviously a huge, CRM brand. They started doing this back in 2020. They first sponsored 6 different podcasts. And now I think they sponsor more than 30 podcasts as the primary sponsor. And so you listen to those podcasts and the main ad that you really hear is HubSpot. The hosts are talking about HubSpot, new features, new product updates. I heard one the other day that they're releasing this new annual report on something. And so all of those podcasters are talking about HubSpot. But there's other brands out there that when it comes to B2B and SaaS that have started using podcasts as a way to reach their consumers and potential customers. Brands like IBM, Salesforce, Gong, those are some of the brands that are starting to dip their toes more into podcasting. Where can you buy ad spots? Well, some of the large podcast ad networks like AdvertiseCast, Podbean, Spotify. If you're trying to be a part of shows or sponsor shows or advertise on shows that have more than 10,000 downloads a month, then you could probably use those ad networks. They typically work off a CPM model, which is a cost per 1,000 downloads. And most CPMs range anywhere between $30 to $50 for 1,000 downloads. Now, again, this is if you're trying to reach a generic podcast, maybe even just your typical entrepreneurial type podcast or business type podcast. But if you're trying to reach niche podcasts, more than likely they're not going to be there. There are some networks that are really niche focused. Here's a few of them. For example, the Legal Talk Network, really just meant for attorneys. And I think they have around 30 podcasts in their network that are really geared toward attorneys. B2B PodPros, that's mine. If you're trying to reach people in the SaaS space or maybe even tech founders, this is a good micro network to work with. There's a generic marketing podcast network. There's an education podcast network. So there's a few. There's not a lot of us yet. I think in the near future, you're going to see more and more pop up. But these are typically networks that have podcasts under their umbrella that have less than 2,000 downloads a month. Some of my top performing ones have around 1,500 downloads a month, and some of the newer ones are the ones that just don't have that type of audience, maybe around 200 downloads a month, right? But they're still valuable because they've got a loyal and engaged audience, and the people who are in their audience are decision makers in deciding what tech products their company, can be using. So typically they work off a flat fee or maybe a cost per episode. We typically do a group sponsorship. And so if you work with us, we're going to put you on a minimum of 5 podcasts over the span of 4 weeks. So you're going to get 20 episodes, and we give you like a flat rate. I can't really speak too much on these other networks on how they work, but more than likely it's going to be a flat fee as well. Right now, if you want to do it yourself, if you want to just, okay, I want to run my own podcast ad campaign myself, I've got a freebie here. It's called the Podcast Sponsorship Checklist. You can download it for free. You just go to b2bpodpros.com, click on the resource button, and you can download it. You don't even have to put your email in, but I think it's great. It's got the research phase, preparing for the campaign launch, and then the post-campaign launch. And it's a lot of just steps that I've learned over time by executing different podcast advertising campaigns. And it really will help you get a better ROI if you follow this little playbook. So feel free to check that out. Okay, next question. And while we're going to cover this next topic, I do want to see in the chat room any questions that you may have for me as we go along, and anything else that maybe I didn't cover, but you're really, really curious about, because I do want to know what is like the top 1 or 2 questions that you in the audience have. I think this could be one of them. How do you measure and track the performance of a campaign or an engagement? Well, there's a few different ways. My favorite way, and we did this at Bonjoro and we did this at OptiMonk, I call it the sneaky shortcut. It's simply adding an extra field on your sign-up form that says, how did you hear about us? Now, you can either leave this field blank and let people just write something in, or if you have different options for people to choose, like, maybe it was a paid search campaign or social media or word of mouth, a referral, make sure you have podcasts in there as a selection, right? Because that way you can kind of attribute directly from the person, the customer, how your podcast campaign is working. We did this at Bonjoro, and after about a year, we realized, oh wow, a lot of our new customers who indicated podcasts, we tied back the revenue that we were getting, and that's where we got $300,000 in ARR. Now, of course, we went on combined more than 80 different podcasts, me and the head of growth, and also our founder. So there was 3 of us that were doing guest podcasting. We think it takes about 30 podcasts minimum for you to be a guest on before you start seeing that needle to move. So don't assume that, oh, if I just go on one podcast, I'm going to really grow my business. No, that's not the case. You should go on at least 30, right? And keep going. That's when you'll see the needle start to move. Other founders that I know have said this myself. Melissa Kwan, she's a 2-time founder. She's the founder of eWebinar. She uses guest podcasting as a growth channel. She's been on more than 100 podcasts, and she said the same thing. Yeah, she went on around 40 or 50 podcasts before she started seeing that lift in traffic and high quality leads. So keep that in mind. The next thing that you can do, or there's some other ways that you can track performance, promo codes. Have the host shout out a promo code during the ad. We recently did this for one of our clients, and we told people that when they go sign up, enter this promo code in, and that way they knew that it was actually from the podcast campaign. Something else that you can do is vanity URLs. This is like creating a memorable URL specifically for the podcast. I don't really recommend this because this is really only for like big names, for like big podcast names. So typically, if Tim Ferriss was promoting a product, and let's just say it was like proteinshakes.com or something, they would create a URL, proteinshakes.com/Tim, and he would tell his listeners to go to that URL. So it's really for big names. UTM tracking codes. This is a no-brainer here. We automatically create these for our podcasts and whenever we do a campaign, but this is just a good way to see within Google Analytics which visitors are clicking on the links that are in each podcast under the podcast episode description. And then another way that you can do is affiliate links. If you have an affiliate program, you can ask the host to sign up for a program and to use that specific affiliate link. From all these, I like the sneaky shortcut in the UTM tracking codes. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, there's tools out there like Dream Data, Hockey Stack, and Dealfront, and Leadfeeder, which is Dealfront. Leadfeeder is one of our clients, and they actually use their own software to track the performance of our campaign. They initially did a 3-week campaign with us, and they saw that some of our podcasts were driving high quality leads. They saw the companies that were coming to their website from our podcast. And so it became a long-term sponsorship deal for 6 months. And of course, they're using their own tool. But again, if you want to get a little bit more advanced and see which companies are coming to your site, what pages they're visiting, then you can use a tool like Dealfront, Hockey Stack, or Dream Data. So those are the various ways that you can use, you can track a podcast campaign. Some advertising tips before we get to Q&A, okay? These I don't think you're going to really see anywhere because this is stuff that we're learning from our own campaigns that we're doing for clients. One of the things is to make sure the host doesn't mention the word commercial. And I hear this a lot. A host will say, now it's time for a commercial. The reason you don't want to do that is because it kind of signals to the listener that, hey, this is not part of the show. So if you want to tune out, go right ahead because you're about to hear an ad. So I would avoid those words, commercial or now it's time for commercial. Don't say that. Okay. Make sure the background soundtrack, if there is one, if there is music playing behind the ad, that it isn't too loud. Okay. The next one is allow the host or ask the host to draft the ad script and let them use the product for free. Whenever we get a client, we always want to use the product, trial it, and test it ourselves because that helps us determine what do we like about the product, because we want to talk about it in a way that we like and we enjoy and that gets us excited. And that's going to make the ad more believable, more authentic, and it's going to make it flow just a lot more fluidly in the episode. So that's the other thing that you should do. You can always provide the host talking points or maybe even some samples of ads that have worked in the past, but really ask them to draft the ad script. Make sure you ask them to ensure that the call to action appears at the top of the show description and hyperlink it with the UTM tracking code. Also, if you have media assets, maybe these are logos, images, or even video, share that with the creator, share that with the podcast, because a lot of podcasters are starting to upload their podcasts to YouTube. And we have some podcasters in our umbrella that do that. And if we have video assets, then we can create a video ad. And it's part of that whole experience for listeners or who are watching the show on YouTube. They get to see the video ad. So they won't just hear it, but they actually get to see, video assets of the product. And I think this is going to get bigger and bigger because more people are starting to listen to podcasts through YouTube versus just through audio. Well, I mean, it's different for every listener. I never used to listen to a podcast on YouTube, but I find now it's a little bit more convenient. And some of my favorite shows, they're on YouTube, and I just go to YouTube and look up the latest show and watch it now. And if they didn't have an ad there, then I wouldn't have heard it. But some do now, and we're starting to do that for our clients. Keep the ad less than 45 seconds. This is based on a study that I recently read. Definitely no more than 60 seconds. And if it's a mid-roll ad, play it before minute 9. Now, I can't really source this, but I'm telling you from our own campaigns, when we're looking at which podcasts perform better, and we're trying to find the reasons why, we're seeing the ones that perform the worst, in lack of a better word, are where the ad came after the 12-minute mark. And so definitely keep it before the 12-minute mark. Even better, before the 9-minute mark. So keep that in mind. And then ask if there are opportunities to sponsor a LinkedIn organic post, a newsletter, or webinar. If you find a podcast host that is driving you high quality leads, I'll show you examples in just a second. But that's just another way to how do you really deepen that partnership with this influencer or podcast host who definitely has an audience that you're trying to go after, and it seems to be a good relationship, and they are driving you high quality leads. This is just an example. Tiny Marketing, one of the podcasts under our umbrella, This is an example of a call to action. Again, at the very top of the episode description, it's hyperlinked with her UTM tracking code. So we want to make sure that any podcast that you're working with, that they do that. And again, provide media assets if you have them. Matt Wallach, he has the Scale Your SaaS podcast. And if you go to his YouTube channel, he's got over 10,000 subscribers, so a lot of viewers. He did this video ad for Leadfeeder, one of our clients, and I thought it came out fantastic, really, really good. Oana Leonte, she just did a campaign with us for Plannable, and she also did a video ad. So if you're watching her show on YouTube, you see the video ad for Plannable, right? So you find a podcaster that you really enjoy, they're driving you high quality leads. Kind of goes back to what I was saying. What else can you do? Ask them. How can you make that partnership be a slam dunk, right? Do they have any newsletters that you could also, sponsor? Maybe even webinars, right? Or maybe they can even be willing to do a LinkedIn storytelling post for you. One of the podcasts that does really well for one of our clients is Full Funnel. And so they do these LinkedIn live events every now and then. And they did one. And I got this message from our client, Deepak, who's at Leadfeeder. And he just says, hey, one of our inbound sales reps said, I just on this call with the prospect, and they said they heard about us from the Full Funnel webinar, right? So that's really, really cool. Okay, so that said, if you want to learn more about me, connect with me. We are going to do Q&A in just a second, but you can find me on LinkedIn under Eric Melchor. And I got some free resources like the checklist, some other goodies. If you just want to go to b2bpodpros.com, and you can click on the resources button there, and you can see some cool things there that can help you. All right, let me stop sharing here, and curious to see what questions came in from this presentation.
We have in the chat and in the Q&A section, we have 2 questions, and I also have some questions for you. You get to choose which one to start with.
All right, let me see here. Let me scroll down. How relevant are the podcasts for mass market, FMCG type of products, in my case, coffee brands? Do people remember normal ads, or do we need only special products with product placement and involvement of the host? How relevant are the podcasts for mass market? Okay, that's a good question, because if you're trying to buy ads on podcasts that have thousands and thousands of listeners, every ad network is a little bit different, but most ad networks, they're only going to insert your ads dynamically through podcasts based on category, right? And so when I see coffee brands, it may just be under brands or podcasts that are under retail, right? Maybe even food retail to get a little bit more specific, but that's it, So you're buying ads based on podcasts that are tagged by a specific category, but you may not know where those ads are appearing. And so that's why I say, like, buying ads on large networks is kind of like a shot in the dark. You just don't really know what you're going to get, what kind of return you're going to get. But I would try to find an ad network where you can just go as specific as you can and look for food retail. And I don't know if you're going to get more specific than that, but that's the first thing. And do people remember normal ads, or we need only special products with product placement among? People remember ads where the host was excited to talk about it and made it seem like they enjoy using that product, right? If the host was just reading a script and it didn't sound exciting at all, and it felt like, oh, I got to do this because I'm getting paid, it's probably not going to work that well. But if a host comes out and says, oh, let me tell you about this new coffee that I like, it smells so fantastic, and the taste, and he mentions that he has 2 cups a day, that ad's more believable. It's more genuine. So that ad's going to perform a lot better. So a lot of it is just how the host presents your ad, how he talks about your product. And that's why I say, let them write the script. And
as you said in the presentation, let them use the product for free.
Exactly. Because if they don't like your product, then it's probably not going to be a good partnership. It's just, people can see through, false advertisement. And it's the same thing with when a person's talking about a product, whether or not they enjoy it.
So in this case of a coffee brand, you know, the host can have the coffee during the podcast and also give a coffee to the guest. Why not?
Why not? I think that's a fantastic idea.
There's another question which is in the Q&A section from Diana Grecu. I am a small company in Romania. How do I use podcast as a platform to promote my company? I create a podcast for my customer, or I promote through a podcast made in Romania by third party, as this material contains promo. I find it difficult to make segmentation on podcast audience. How do you do segmentation on podcasts? In Romania, more than 70% of the podcasts are about stars, I guess, popular people in Romania. This is the question from Diana Grecu.
Yeah. Now, I don't really know about your business, but it sounds like it's based clientele base. And if it's clientele based, then I would start off by launching a podcast on your own and interview your ideal clients, your prospects that you're trying to get to know, because it's a great door opener. Most people that you're trying to sell to, you know, if they're not ready to buy, they're not ready to buy. They're not going to talk to you. But if you invite them, hey, want to come on my show, you can talk about your journey, you can talk about your product, make it about them, then all of a sudden you open that door to a new relationship. And don't worry about the audience size that you're getting, because it's more about leveraging a podcast as a door opener for potential new clients.
If we go back 15 or 20 years ago, many companies were having their own blog. So probably today, this blog or that blog would be replaced by the company podcast, let's say.
Absolutely. That's what some companies started doing. Instead of just interviewing, for example, interviewing the CEO or the chief marketing officer and putting their thoughts on a blog post. You know, here's what we think where the industry is going. They just did a podcast, and they started distributing that podcast out, and it showed a better light of who the person was, because we hear somebody's voice, you feel like you have a better connection just reading text on screen.
I will move now to my questions, not in a necessary, I don't know, specific order or something. How do you perceive the current landscape of podcasting? I mean, it went up quite a lot in the last, I don't know, 4 years or something, since the pandemics probably. So how do you perceive the current landscape of podcasting? And what makes a podcast an effective marketing tool if you were to pick, I don't know, 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think if you started a podcast today, I think you're late to the game. And the reason I say that is because there's now lots and lots of different podcasts per genre, per category. I think, just for example, a startup podcast, there's probably at least 20 or 30 now that are focused on startups, right? But the average person only listens to 5 or 6 podcasts that's in their library. And so there's just not a lot of shelf space for new podcasts. I mean, I listen to one podcast episode every 2 days, right? I'm not going to, just because there's new podcasts, check those out. No, I'm not going to allocate more time for new shows. So I think it's very, very hard to break in and try to grow a podcast, which is why I recommend, if you're trying to just develop relationships, then try to leverage it that way. In terms of marketing and distribution, I think it's the best marketing channel there is, because you can slice and dice an episode, create clips for it. You can put the full episode on YouTube. Riverside, that does my recording, automatically creates 10 clips through AI for each show that I record. And then it automatically produces notes. And what I can do from those notes is copy those notes, put it into ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to create a blog post for it. So now I've got a blog post, and now I can ask ChatGPT, okay, put this in a summary form that I can promote on LinkedIn. I got a LinkedIn post. I can create Twitter posts for it, Facebook for it, and then also can just take content, put it in a newsletter. I started putting my podcast episodes, not necessarily the episode, but promoting the person or the guest on Quora. And that's been a huge way to increase my my visibility and my downloads. There's a Romanian startup that I interviewed, and you can pay your credit card, you can pay your bills through their app. And Pago, I think, is it Pago? Is it Pago, Cătălin?
Yeah, I heard of Pago.
Okay, well,
I heard of it.
I posted like, what's the best way to pay your bills in Europe on Quora, and that question has gotten thousands of views, thousands of views, and other people commenting. But anyway, it came from the podcast recording. So I can post, on Reddit. I can post this in different Slack communities, and it's just a great way to like distribute easily 7 to 20 different ways that you can distribute content from your podcast on other platforms that you own, or just on social media.
So basically, with a fraction of I don't know, with a fraction of effort, of more effort, you can do a lot with a podcast. And you record it, and then from there you can go through various channels to promote it or whatever.
Yeah, one of the best distribution channels I have is my guests. On the day that it goes live, I send them an email. I send them a couple of assets, a picture of the podcast cover, and then maybe a short clip, and ask them if they could share it, on their social media. And 50% of them usually do. And so it's just more exposure for the show, more exposure for me, more exposure for them. But that's just another great way to leverage that. Another thing that we do, if the show is really good, you can go to other podcasters and say, hey, do you have you want to do an episode swap? And so I did this recently. I was a guest on somebody's podcast talking about how to throw cocktail parties if you're an introvert. And I thought it was a really good interview. It was on his podcast. I asked him for the recording. I made some changes to the recording, to the intro, and I recorded a new intro and an outro, and I republished that same episode on my podcast. And so that's another way you can leverage it, but sharing that content on other podcasts as well.
Somehow across promotion.
Correct.
Okay. You said it is, the market now is quite full of podcasts, but this shouldn't be a discouragement for anyone who wants to start a podcast, right? I personally, I believe that there is room for everybody in the market. And for me, it seems very, that it can be very successful, a niche podcast, like micro influencers. If your company, let's say, is producing only pistachio croissants or whatever, then you'll have a very specific audience that you can go to, even if it's going to be 15 people in the room, like you said, but you can be sure that your info will get to those 15 guys.
Absolutely. And also how you say, how you present, how you interview, your style. A lot of people tune in, not necessarily for things that they're going to learn, but they just want to feel like they're hanging out with some third-party friends. One of my favorite podcasts,
being part of a community that you would like to be a part of.
Exactly. Oh, I feel like I'm hanging out with the host, because he's a funny guy, and he sees things how I see things, and you just feel like you're hanging out with them, and then you learn from other people. You like that podcast, and all of a sudden you have this new connection, like, oh, we enjoy the same things, and you feel like you bonded over a show that you like.
So basically, you can start a successful podcast from your hobby, like I don't know, you're a Lego enthusiast or something. So by talking about Legos, you can create a community around you.
Yes. And Cătălin, that is the best thing that you should podcast if you're deciding to do one. What are you passionate about? What is your hobby, right? For me, I moved here. I didn't really know anybody. I was passionate about startups, and I wanted to meet other entrepreneurs. Let me interview them. And my entire first season is interviewing Romanian startup founders. And for me, it was like, this is casual. This is fun. This gives me energy. What's going to give you energy to talk about? Building Legos? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's planting. Maybe it's talking about the best covric places in town. Who knows? But whatever you're passionate about, that's what you should go start a podcast on.
Okay. Another question I prepared before the show. What specific benefits do business podcasts offer for companies looking to reach their target audience and generate leads?
New customers, enterprise deals, one of our clients, Dealfront, I mean, they just renewed another 3-month term partnership with us. And it's because our audience it's new audiences that they couldn't reach through their traditional channels, through blogging, through white papers, through paid search, right? And so it potentially could be a new growth channel that's reaching a target audience that you can't reach other ways. Whether you've been trying through Facebook ads or maybe blogging or whatever, but you just been unsuccessful. And so you get the chance to piggyback on this person's audience. Just call it digital real estate, right? And that's the easy thing, because they did the hard work of finding your audience for you. So that's the main benefit.
Coming back to the question about the small company in Romania that would be how would they use a podcast? What kind of goals should you set when you have a campaign that you want to go to a podcast with? Or if you what kind of goals do you set if you want to start a company podcast?
Okay, so if you're launching your own company podcast, first I would identify, okay, what's the main goal, right? Is it to leverage relationships, begin new relationships, right? Let's just say that's the goal. I would find out who are the people that you want to have on the show that could be potential customers, or maybe even potential partners, right? Because partners could be a great thing, or maybe even other experts. So maybe have 3 different buckets of the type of guests that you want to have on your show: potential clients, potential partners, and other experts in the industry that may be similar to you. Write down that list. Let's just plan for 1 season. Maybe a season's going to be 10 episodes, okay? And find out, who you want to have on that show for that first season. And then once you have that, I think 50% of the work is done. And then find out, okay, what kind of format is it going to be? I recommend 30 minutes or less, but I recommend interview style, where they're mostly doing a lot of the talking, and you prepare some questions in advance like Cătălin did. And then you can just kind of let them know, based on what I know about you, here's some things that I want to learn, that I want to talk about. And then on my pre-interview form, I have a couple of specific questions. One of the questions is, if you can get on stage and talk about anything for 30 minutes without no preparation, what would that be? And then the second question is like, what valuable topic or story would you like to share with my audience, given that my audience is, and then you write that information in. And so just knowing that basic information will give you a show. So I think once you have that down, everything else you can be learned, like how to record, what platform to use, how to distribute. Those things can be learned, or you could find freelancers or other people to do those things for you.
Talking about this one, how can you start a podcast? What do you do? I mean, what are the first steps when you want to start a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, let's say you have the video ready to be recorded, or the interview ready to be recorded, right? First step is
even before that.
Well, again, I think it goes back to
goals. I mean, it is enough to record it with I don't know, the laptop camera and the laptop microphone. You need another camera or another microphone, things like that.
You can get started with Zoom.
Useful tips.
Yeah, you can get started with Zoom, and Zoom can do the recording for you, right?
Okay.
Now, once you start recording, if you're going to take it seriously, I recommend another platform like maybe Riverside, because if the internet is clunky, that can screw up the recording, and that's why most podcast hosts don't use Zoom, right? But you can use Zoom, good lighting. Make sure that you've got good lighting at least, and good sound. And the sound quality is not necessarily about the type of microphone. It's just more about being a place that's quiet. So if you're going to record, make sure the kids aren't running around and screaming, that you've got a place that you're not going to be interrupted. You got your
or you're not stuck in the Bucharest traffic.
No, definitely not stuck there. But yeah, I mean, those are some basic tips. And anybody that wants to just like, talk podcasting, I can share my experience. They could always message me after this. But those are the basics. When I got started, I used to put pillows around my laptop. The reason being is that right next door, they were building a new apartment building. And so you heard this digging and drilling. And so I had these pillows around my laptop. And I was thinking about calling my podcast Pillow Talk with Eric.
Okay. Could have been misleading if you knew only the title.
It would have been misleading. But it was really funny with my first few episodes that I recorded. I don't have a lot of fancy equipment, but one thing that you should invest in is a decent microphone for the sound quality. I think I spent $80 on my microphone, but you can find some decent ones out there for less than $100. And then eventually I bought a circle light, and you can get these off eMag, and I always have that behind my laptop, so I have decent lighting. And that's something you could probably get for like 200 lei.
You kind of have it now, right? I can see it in your glasses.
I've got it now. Yeah, so for decent lighting.
I think it is something like this.
Yeah, yeah. So I got it now. And obviously it doesn't go great if I've got glass behind me because of the reflection, but invest in that for decent lighting.
I do have another question prepared. From your experience in this field, can you give us or share with us some success stories or some case studies of businesses that have effectively using podcasts for marketing?
Yeah, well, OptiMonk was one of them. And I met Jaba, who's the founder. They're based in Hungary. He was a guest on my show. And he approached me and said, would you like to work with us? And you could just basically be an ambassador. And there was a lot of other things that I did for them, but the main thing was he wasn't really, he didn't feel his English was he wasn't confident enough in his English to go on podcasts and talk about OptiMonk. And so I was like the face of the brand for an entire year and going on various e-commerce podcasts talking about OptiMonk. And I think I did over close to 50 episodes. And what I enjoy about that is that within 7 or 8 months, because of that question that we asked on the sign-up form, where did you hear about us? Almost 10% of new customers were indicating podcasts. So we were reaching a new audience. People were receptive to the message that we were sharing, and they were starting to indicate that as they were coming and signing up for OptiMonk. And so I think that was one of the biggest highlights. And because we saw that at Bonjoro, but at Bonjoro, there was 3 of us. And at OptiMonk, it was just me that was doing that. And the other big success is that a lot of podcasters in the B2B space, they haven't been compensated. So a lot of them are doing this more leveraging the relationships. But at the same time, if they've been doing it a few years, they've been building this podcast audience. And for many of them, I've been able to bring them their first sponsorship. And it's just an extra way for them to earn some additional income. And that's what really makes me happy. And they're excited to be a part of the community because a lot of them never thought that they would get any sort of sponsorships for their podcast, because most brands, when you tell them, hey, I got 400 downloads a month, it just doesn't sound that appealing. They think that's really small, right? But if you go to a brand and say, hey, I can get you on 5 podcasts and, we'll probably do about maybe 3,000 or 4,000 downloads, but it's your target market, that's a lot more attractive, that pitch.
We have another question in a Q&A section, and that would be the last one for today. So if you can keep it, please, the answer, if you can keep it within 1 minute, it would be great. Question is this from Sabina. Do you think a home and deco brand could start a podcast in Romania? The audience is small, designers, architects. So how can we reach a large public? We want to go to our customers and engage them somehow. We don't want to record something just for the home and deco specialists.
Yeah, I would bring home and decor specialists as guests on the show. And there's probably you can have different topics for each episode. Maybe improving your bathroom, or how to improve your kitchen, right? There's so many different episodes on home and decor. And you bring these different specialists, these different contractors or specialists or other business owners onto your show. And then all of a sudden, that becomes the main podcast in this market for that category. And the people who are going to be spreading and distributing the messages are your guests. And they're going to be distributed to their audience. Maybe they have newsletters. Maybe they have email lists, right? They can promote it for you. And to me, that's a slam dunk. If there's not a category that exists right now in the Romanian market for your business, you should be the first one there, because as most of us know, once you're the first one, you've got a better chance of getting a lot more market share than anybody who comes after you.
Yes, on this specific topic, I think if we had or have successful blogs on home and deco topic, for sure, podcasts will be or can be successful. Eric, thank you very much. For me personally, but I'm sure for our audience, was very useful conversation we had today. Thank you everybody who was with us for attending this event. And for the latest information about events and meetings that are organized by EventsMax, please consult the online platform and subscribe, as I said, for free to their newsletters. The areas of interest you can have newsletters are more than 100. So thank you very much. All the best to you and see you next time. Thank you very much, Eric. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.